Good afternoon, everyone, and I would like to thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon for our live webcast. The focus for our live session today is on test automation framework using UFT QTP. We will be presenting the new features of UFT version 12. We'll introduce test automation framework and also introduce different types of frameworks such as data-driven and more. I am proud to be joined by my colleague, Valerie, our Test House CTO. The presentation will last between 30 to 40 minutes and plus Q&A at the end of the session. Before I pass you over to my colleague, Valerie, please feel free to type in your questions on your Q&A pod now or during the presentation. We will hopefully answer most of your questions if time allows. A full screen is also available at the top of your screen, which would be useful when Valerie does his demo this afternoon. Without further delay, and I'll pass you over to my colleague, Valerie.
Thank you, Mel. Good afternoon, everyone. So before we get started, maybe I will talk a bit about my background, just to give you in context. So I started testing about 10 years ago, and I was hired by a company called Mercury Interactive. At that time, I didn't really know what it was, but I quickly understood that actually WinRunner and QTP were testing tools, and the market was just starting to take off. So I worked as a support engineer for those tools, the functional testing and also the test directory integration. So this is my background. It's mostly HP or Mercury tools as it was at that time. And after that, I went a bit independent as a consultant, using the skill I acquired and helping many other companies with those tools. As of today, or since the beginning of this year, I just joined Test House as the CTO. My background, just to summarize, is mostly HP and Microsoft tools, so I have quite a good understanding of the market, but I also do some other tools like Selenium and so on. So let's get started. So the agenda for this afternoon, so we're going to briefly look upon the UFT 12 new features. Actually, we'll look at the UFT new features, so it covers also 11.5. Once we've gone over this, we will look at test frameworks, what they are, and a brief introduction of why we should have one when we do test automation. We'll have a quick look at implementing a framework using UFT. It's mostly looking at the different aspects or features of UFT that can help us build a framework. And more interestingly, we'll look at a couple of demos where I hope you will see the value of using a framework. And once we finish with this, we'll go back to the Q&A session with Melanie leading the way. So let's have a look at the new features that were introduced in UFT 11.5 or 12. Okay, I'm not going to cover all the features, it's just the most important aspects. So there's a new name. It's now called Unified Functional Testing, and it was called QuickTest Professional before. It's due to the fact that actually QTP and another tool called Service Test were merged together in a brand new tool. So QTP is still there, but it's embedded within UFT. While HP did this, they also introduced a new appearance to give a common look and feel for both tools, which are now integrated into one, and also to provide an integrated development environment, which gives you a lot more capability when developing your automated tests. There's another new feature which has been introduced. It's called Insights, and basically it gives you the ability to create QTP UI objects on objects you cannot actually learn because of the technology limitations. So here I give an example of the player. Okay, we have a play button. So using Insight, we can actually learn this object add it to the object repository, and then we can use it in our code as if it was a standard UI object. So obviously this is quite an evolution from what we had, or we still have virtual objects in QTP, where we were coordinate-based. So this time, instead of using coordinate, we use a feature to find the object. It's a last resort solution, again, because you are using a feature which is quite sensitive. For instance, if you move your mouse over the object, the display of the button is going to change and it won't work. Okay, so any slight changes to the UI might impact the ability to replay those type of scripts. And also, because you're not accessing the underlying technology, you will have limited action ability. So you will only be able to use your mouse and your keyboard. But there's a couple of specific functions which have been introduced for this object. So you have, for instance, click special, which is actually doing a click without hovering over the object. You have hover, and you also have a long click to perform a long click. So they recognize that there are special needs for those type of objects, and they wrote those functions for you as well. Also quite important is the browser support. So they extended the browser support in 11.5, in 12, and also in 12.01. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. I'm not sure even if it has been released yet. It's fairly new. But they extended the support. So for internet browsers, which we support from 8 to 11. Also with the extended enhanced protection mode is now supported. In Firefox, supported till version 31. Chrome is supported to the latest version. There's a caveat here is if you want to support earlier than version 17, you need to contact HP, and they will give you some settings to apply to be able to do so. And for Mac, for Safari, on Mac, there's a new support which has been introduced in 12, and now it supports version 6, 6.10, and 7, and it has to be running on Mac. So I'll come back to this in a second to explain more in detail this Safari support. But just bear in mind that Safari support was in tech preview in 12, and in 12.01 it's no longer tech preview, so it's fully supported. And there's also support for HTML5 objects, so it supports some of them, such as web branch, web numbers, web video, and web audio. For the last two, it only supports for replay, so that means you need to write the script that corresponds to it. It's not going to record a web video or web audio object. So let's go back to the Safari support. So this is quite new, but don't get confused. HP UFT is a Windows application, so it does work only on Windows operating system. So you cannot run it on a Mac OS. So if you want to be able to test Safari on a Mac OS, there's a bit of setup, and you need to install a couple of pieces of software. One is called the UFT connection agent on the Mac, which will give the ability of for QTP for UFT. I need to get used to this new naming. For UFT to talk to the connection agent on the Mac, and then there's a UFT agent which has to be run on as an add-in with the browser to allow the agent to interact with the Safari browser. Okay. There's also a few limitations if you want to do that. You cannot record on Safari directly. You need to record using Google Chrome, which is the closest browser, the one that behaves as closely as possible to Safari. And there's features like object spy, bitmap capture, mouse replays, such as using the device replay. All of this doesn't work because this is executed locally on the Windows client. It's not being sent back to the Mac OS. So bear in mind that you can only do the web steps. You can only replay those steps. Okay, so that was a quick intro to some of the new features of UFT if you were not aware of it. So next step is introduce what is a test framework and have a good understanding of why we should be using one. So there's several useful features in a framework. I'm going to summarize 6 of them. The first one is it gives you a level of abstraction. So instead of having to write complex piece of code, you create a level of abstraction, and basically you hide the complexity under sub-layers. So if you want to write a test, instead of having to interact with maybe technology-specific objects, you might say, okay, I'm going to write it in such a way that is technology agnostic, for instance. So we use abstractions for both purposes. One is technical, so hide the complexity, and also for business purpose, where you want your test to be more understandable by SMEs, subject matter experts. It's also useful for increasing reusability. So you by using a framework, by using a framework abstracting, you make it more reusable by having functions that you can use somewhere else, maybe in another test. So if it's web-based, you will have common features, so you can reuse them. And it also helps you reduce the amount of code, so hence increase the maintainability of your test. Also, it's providing an easier to understand language. So you just, by abstracting it, you can define keywords that are easier to understand for your for who is going to write your test scripts. It also provides a separation of concerns, and separation of concerns is actually a very important aspect. And if you look at the development evolution, separation of concern is something that has always been there, but it's more and more used in software development. If you take, for instance, design patterns, if you heard of this, those are concepts which allow the separation of concern. What else? MVC is another example, MVC, MVVM, and so on. So there's a lot of concepts in programming which are focused on SOC, and there's no reason why we wouldn't do the same with test automation, because if you look at test automation, you're actually writing a piece of code, you're writing a program which is for testing another program, but it's still a program. So you should have the same goals in mind as a developer as well. And it also creates a single point of failure. So that means when something breaks, when the application changes, instead of having to change your code in many places, by having built a proper framework, you will have only one place where you need to fix the code, and your entire test will work again. So it's quite interesting what advantage you can gain from using a framework. So on the right-hand side, I show like a small graph to tell you what features you can add to your test and embed them in your framework. So for instance, I put multi-language, so you can have support for multi-languages. And if your website is, let's say, in English and French, you can run the same test, and the framework will take care of managing your test when it's doing it in English or doing it in French, or if, let's say tomorrow you're doing it in Russian. So in terms of frameworks, so there's 3 main types we can see. One is called Modular. So the idea is to have the ability to reuse what you developed from one test to another. So basically, you're creating components of your test. You're dividing your tests in reusable components or modules. Obviously, when you do this, you have to be careful that you define what we call a contract. So you define a sort of API or interface where you say, okay, the input will come that way, the output will be stored that way, or will go that way. So you need to have a common way with dealing with the inputs and outputs. That's probably the most simple type of framework you can get. The next framework is called data-driven framework. So here let's say you build a script. If you've used UFT or QTP before, you know that you record a test, you type some values in field and so on. Once you finish your test, all the values are hard-coded in your script. So obviously you can replay your script, but ideally what you want to be able to do is to parameterize your data. So the data-driven frameworks allows you to do that, and actually, as we'll see, QTP has some aspect of this. So in this example, we can see that we have a calculator, and we might want to be able to do different type of operations and validate the output, the result. By doing this, it's also quite interesting because you provide a separation between the test scripts and the data, which means the data can be written by an SME who has no knowledge about QuickTest or UFT, who has no knowledge about test automation, but basically if he has a spreadsheet and he understands what value has to be put in there, he can prepare the data for you. The third type of framework is called keyword-driven. So it's a bit more advanced. So here, instead of writing a specific test for each business scenario you have to test, what you do is you create a controller, so it's just one test, which is actually going to read a file, so let's say an Excel file, and it's going to execute step by step what you described in this file. Okay, so what you're doing is you're actually moving away from scripting your test to having an engine which is able to read this Excel spreadsheet and generate on the fly the steps and interact with the application. It's more complex because it needs to answer a few technical challenges, and at the same time it has to provide a unified language approach. So if you see in the example, we set the value to me for the login, for the username object. Okay, we're not telling which technology is being used, so obviously the controller has to infer all of that. So those are the three types of frameworks you can get. There's a fourth one, which we call hybrid, but basically it's a combination of the frameworks we've seen so far. So and that's probably the most common type. You don't really have pure modular frameworks, pure data-driven or pure keyword-driven. It's usually a combination of those three with more features even. So that was quite a brief introduction to what a test framework is. So what about UFT? How does UFT help us implement a framework? So if you look at UFT, there's already framework elements embedded into the tool. For instance, componentization is already there. We have what we call reusable actions. So you see an example here where we have three actions: action 1, action 2, and action 3, and they are reusable. So I can, in action 1, I can do, let's say, the login step to a website. And if I create a second test, I can reuse this action in another test. So this componentization already exists. There is a data table. So again, to create a data-driven framework, then we already have this feature which allows us to move the data outside of the test and put it in a data table, which is an Excel spreadsheet. And the last example I want to give here is the keyword-driven framework. So it's not exactly the way I presented it here, but in UFT you have a view which is called the keyword view. And you can basically, if you learn the objects, you can basically select them from a drop-down list, do standard operations against them, and just provide the value. So you see there's an easy way to create your test if you populated the object repository beforehand. There's also a few other aspects which makes it easy for you to build frameworks. There's what we call a function library, so it's VB-script functions you can write and reuse across tests. Descriptive programming is a very useful one. It allows you to build test objects on the fly. So basically you have the description of the object somewhere. It could be in a spreadsheet, and QTP can use this description, this test description, and build the object on the fly. So it avoids using the object repository. So that means the object doesn't have to be known before the test starts. So again, the data table is a useful way to data drive your test, and you can even change from a data table to use an Excel spreadsheet. It's just a setting within UFT. UFT, or the VB-script engine, also has a .NET object where you can create .NET objects on the fly. So you can actually use your Visual Studio development tool. You can create new functionalities and then use them within UFT. So it's quite powerful because you associate two very good tools together to achieve what you need. Obviously, the VB-script language is quite useful here as well. Even though it's a very, I wouldn't say old, but it's a language which has been developed quite a few years ago. It's a scripting language, so it's very easy for you to integrate framework aspects, specifically with the loose typing you have in the VB-script language. And the last time I just want to mention here is a function called register user func. So basically you can extend QTP objects by adding methods, and using the register user func, both methods are seen as if they were out-of-the-box methods for those objects. So it's quite powerful as well. So now we've seen briefly how UFT can be enhanced using some of those features. I'm going to do two demos. One was not enough. So the first one is a web application, a very basic form where we need to fill in some information. And what I want to show is with a framework, you can make your test more resilient. So obviously it's a demo, but imagine you had hundreds of scripts and we're going to make a change to our application. And what we want is with minimal change, minimal maintenance, we want all our scripts to work again. So that will be the first demo. And the second demo is with the calculator. I like this application because it's very easy to understand, but what I'm going to show is a business-oriented type of framework where we gradually abstracted it to make it very powerful. So you will see this during the demo. So now I'm just going to start the demo. Okay, so you can all see my screen now. So I just started UFT 12. And I'm just going to show you the first application I'm going to use for the demo. So basically it's a form. You have to edit fields. With two drop-downs. Okay, and a checkbox. Very simple application. So earlier I created a test for that. Okay, let's look at the code. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm just starting this HTML file. So here it's just some code to work around the security from Internet Explorer, so you don't have to deal with it, but more importantly is this part. So basically we're going to set the values, first name, last name, age, gender, and terms. Okay, so this is a very basic test. This is mostly what you would get by just recording the test against the application. So I just press run. Hopefully will work fine. like first name, last name, age, 3 to 18, female, and we agree to terms and conditions. So I just put a wait statement at the beginning, at the end, otherwise it was a bit too quick. Okay, so that's the first example, very simple. But let's just say our application is evolving, and developers like to use new features and so on, and they decided to use third-party controls. Okay, and here basically you see that the drop-downs are no longer standard drop-downs, they are telleric drop-downs. And what we can see, it seems to be struggling to set the age, to set the gender. I mean, about 10 seconds now it's going to fail. Here we go. Okay, so obviously it says fail to identify those objects because they are non-standard. So this select method, this actually web list is unknown. It doesn't even exist as a drop-down in this application is different. Okay, so without a framework, let's say you have 100 tests like this, all the web list or the drop-downs have been changed. You need to edit every single test to update and support those new web list objects. So instead of that, you could have, let's say, created some aspect of the framework by introducing functions. So I'll just call it set class. Okay, so there are specific functions to your framework. What would happen? Let's say you have the first version of your application. Set plus would basically do a set. Select plus would basically do a select. Okay, so no major change here. It's still the same. However, when you move to a new version of your application, without changing any line of your code, you can support a new version of your controls. Okay, and this is achieved by having RawSpecific methods. So when it fails, there's a single place within your framework you need to update, and by doing this, you suddenly are fixing your You're suddenly fixing your issue for all the application. So you see that set plus basically just do a set because here there's no change in functionality, but select plus would select the object if it existed, but because it doesn't exist, it's a third-party control. We introduce a piece of code to deal with this. And again, for the test itself, it's all transparent. You still code it the same way. So that's the first demo. Let's move on to the second one. So this second demo is basically using the calculator. I'm just going to run this test. Okay, I'm doing 1 plus 2 equal, and hopefully it gives me the result of 3. So if I look at the test result, this test has passed. So the result is correct. Okay, so this is a hard-coded version of the test. So it's very limited in what you can do with it. So I move to a more evolved type of test, where here we actually are data driving our test. So if we look here at the buttons within our calculator, so they have a label. So just to show you how I did it. So I created an object for each button, and for instance, all the digits and numbers, they have an associated object with the label set to the number. Okay, so I have a data table. I've got my first number I need to type. the operator, the second number you need to type, and my expected result. So I type this first number, operator, and be equal. So we have some aspect of the framework here. It did pass. And we can easily extend our test and imagine it's a SME who doesn't have knowledge about testing, and there's even more writing scripts. They can extend it and add more data to the test. And if I run this test, now I have two rows. It will execute this test twice, with the two sets of data, and hopefully this time it's going to fail, because 2 minus 1 is not actually going to return 2, it's going to return 1. So that's actually a data issue. If I do this, it should work properly. And the test passed. Okay, so not so bad. It's quite reusable, but I think we can do better. And this is the third demo. And this time, even the code looks very simple. So let's run it. And let me explain to you after that. Okay, it did 1 plus 2 equal, and hopefully it did pass, right? Okay, result is correct, 3. So basically here what I did is actually, if you look at the data first of all, so there's a test name, just for convenience. There's an operation field where I provide the data or the actions to do on the calculator. So we say type 1, then plus, then 2, then press equal. And then obviously we need to validate the outcome, so we have an expected result like we did in the previous demo. So far it looks very similar. And if I open the function library, If I open the function library for this demo, okay, we have two customized functions, where one is to read this operation cell or this data and actually pass and click on the relevant buttons. And we have the second one to actually validate against the expected result and report a pass or a fail depending on the outcome. Okay, and what you can see here, we used one of the aspects I presented earlier. We use the register user function against the window object, and we say type operation now becomes a method of this window object. So it's as if this, you can see type operation here, it's as if it was part of UFT. Okay. So that means this test can become a lot more powerful than the other two, and I can do pretty much what I want here. So now I added another row of data, and you can see I have a very complex operation. Here we go. And hopefully it will pass for both iterations. Okay, so I hope you see the value, the added value of using a framework through those two demos. So obviously we're moving in the Q&A session. We're running out of time, so hopefully I will be able to answer quickly. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Valerie, for that excellent presentation and giving us a sneak peek of test automation framework. As Valerie mentioned, we are now taking questions, and so please do type your questions on your individual Q&A pod, and we will try and answer most, if not all. We will take some of this offline if necessary. So please do type in any questions that you want to ask Valerie from the presentation this afternoon. So I have a few coming. Let's start with the first question. First question: Can a framework be reused with different technologies?
The answer is yes and no, so it all depends on how you design your framework. But a framework can be technology agnostic. I have a very good example with a bank I work with, where we designed a framework for 6 or 7 different applications, and they were using a variation of technology, being Silverlight, web-based, .NET, Java. It's actually custom Java, custom .NET, and they all use the same core framework. So they had a core framework which was technology agnostic, and there were some extensions which obviously were technology specific. But all the behavior from the framework was the same across all those products.
Thanks, Valerie. Another question for you. Why should we use UFT instead of Selenium?
Okay, again, there's multiple answers to that. The first one, obviously, is technology support. If you take Selenium only supports web-based application. If your application is not web-based, then Selenium is pretty much useless to you. You obviously will have to use something like UFT for .NET, Java, green screen, SAP, and so on. So this support with UFT is quite wide. If you use Selenium, you're obviously limited to web-based. If your application is web-based, there's also, we can argue on that, but QTP provides a level of abstraction which is probably better than what you have with Selenium. Selenium, you will be quite low level, and in terms of object identification, you need to use CSS selectors or XPath, which is a bit more complex.
Thanks, Valerie. Next question: does it support mobile application? Valerie?
So look, I guess the question is, does UFT support mobile applications? The answer is yes. I hope I don't get it wrong. There's an add-in which has been developed between HP and Perfecto Mobile, which provides support for those mobile applications. So there's quite a varied or a deep support for various technologies, being Android, Windows, mobile, and so on, BlackBerry, and so on.
Next question: what is the new features in UFT? Can we validate PDF documents?
That's actually a very good question. So yes, the PDF document is actually a new feature. New feature in UFT. There's a support for Adobe Reader. How much does it support? I actually don't know, because I haven't tried it myself. But I'm assuming you can now validate and extract or validate that some text is there, and so on.
Thanks, Valerie. A few more questions coming in. Next question: the function library and reusable actions shown in the demo are available in version 9. Can you please explain the difference in UFT?
Here there's no difference. Obviously this webinar was here to demonstrate how you can build a framework on top of UFT, and the example I gave is also valid for QTP version 9, or even probably 6.5 might still work as well. So there's some aspects, obviously, which are quite generic and will work with previous versions. But for instance, something I might give as an example, in UFT there's support for CSS selector and XPath for web-based application. This didn't exist in a previous version, and that's quite a handy feature, especially when you're building a framework, because it gives you more capability with a framework-based test script.
Two more questions, Valerie. Are there any improvements with object recognition for web application?
Yes, I actually just mentioned it. So basically, XPath. So XPath, CSS selectors are two of them. There's a new property type. So you need to prepend it with attribute slash or backslash, then the attribute name. But you can now support custom attributes in your tags.
Next question, can we use a framework if we are also using extensibility?
Definitely. One is not preventing the other. Obviously, extensibility is a bit more complex to write, but if you're using extensibility, you're basically creating custom objects, but those custom objects can be part of your framework as well. The framework can be technology agnostic again.
Okay, well, just grab one or two more questions, and we'll just take some of this offline. Okay, next question. UFT seems to be more unstable than QTP. Do you find this is so?
I've used UFT in the last 4 or 5 months. To be honest, no, I haven't seen instability as such. Probably a couple of crash, but I use UFT in a very advanced manner, so I know sometimes it's sensitive in the way I use it. But I didn't see it more unstable than earlier version. It's quite a good product, and even so, I feel that since it's been taken over by HP, especially in the last 1 or 2 release, the products have been a lot more stable, like QC, Quality Center, or ALM.
Okay, last question, Valerie. How can mobile device testing be integrated with desktop-based or web-based application testing or end-to-end test?
Okay, let me rephrase this. So I'm assuming you have an end-to-end test, and what you want as part of your end-to-end test has something to do with your mobile, maybe replying to something and make sure it appears back on the backend server, something like that. I haven't tried this mobile testing add-in, so I cannot tell you for sure. But if there's a keen interest, I could have a look and maybe create another webinar for that.
Thank you so much, Valerie. That sort of concludes our Q&A session, everyone. The recording will be available with you within the next couple of days, I would say earliest this Friday. Before we go, again, if you do have any further questions to ask Valerie, please do email me. My contact details are on your slides right now, and I will forward the questions to Valerie. Thank you, Valerie, for the valuable presentation today, and thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon.